Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland Brothers. Whatever it is that you want to see, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. No matter whatever that happens to be, ask the Leyland Brothers. Come on, me in and join in the fun. Travel all over Australia.
This week we have two stories for you, a small one and a large one. Now where do we start off, Mal?
Well, our first story is the small story, and it comes from down here in Tasmania. At least it's a small thing to see. It's a model of a Tudor village, a complete reconstruction of an English Tudor village. What about our large story, Mike? Where's that come from?
It's the Snowy Mountains hydroelectricity scheme. We start here in the Snowy Mountains and follow the course of the water through the generating plants of the Tumut Snowy section, right through into the Murrumbidgee River, and pick up the Murrumbidgee irrigation area down here, where we show how the water's used in the irrigation scheme.
We've come to Sandy Bay in Tasmania at the suggestion of Robert Catuzzo from West Hindmarsh in South Australia. Mr. Catuzzo writes and says, something which I'm sure many viewers would enjoy seeing is the model Tudor village at Sandy Bay in Tasmania. The village was created by John Pallotta, who was totally incapacitated and crippled at the age of 9 by poliomyelitis. It is a scale model of the village of Chelham, county of Kent, England, where he once lived. Well, that scale model of the Tudor village is today situated in this place known as Tudor Court, which is rather interesting because it used to, at one time, be a stopover for Cobb & Co coaches on their way to Hobart. And today, it's run by Alan McCartney. Alan, perhaps you can tell me a few things about John Pallotta, the man who created this.
Yes, indeed. Now, John was born in England in a tiny little village called Chelham, which is in the county of Kent, and that, if anyone knows England very well, is 6 miles southwest of Canterbury, very picturesque area. And John came to this country at the age of 9, having contracted polio. And after several years in hospital, he was a very sickly person. He eventually ended up completely paralysed and wheelchair-bound, with the ability to move only his fingertips and nod his head from side to side. He couldn't go back to England, so he decided, I'll sit down and recreate the buildings that I'd known and loved so much for myself. And he set about working, and most of the models are constructed from matchsticks, dental plaster, wire and paint.
This old coaching inn now attracts the largest number of visitors of any attraction in Tasmania. And yet the object of all this attention lies inside a room smaller than the average lounge room of a home. The amazingly detailed models of houses, shops and churches is a truly astonishing achievement for one man, let alone one so crippled as John Pallotta. John created everything displayed on the large table, using meticulously gathered information so that each building is an exact replica of an existing building in England. The entire village took him 12 years to build, and he was still working on more models when he died. All this, we are told, was created by a man who was desperately homesick for his beloved Chelham in England, where, as a boy, he enjoyed a normal childhood before contracting poliomyelitis at the age of 9. And then spending the rest of his life confined to a wheelchair. He worked tirelessly creating the accurate details, even though he could not uncross his hands. Using wire, matchsticks, dental plaster and paint, he constructed each part of the model to exact scale. This man's hobby has now become a remarkable memorial to his determination and eye for detail. The church, St Mary's at Chelham in Kent, was built in the 14th century, and this model took Pallotta 2 years to construct using information supplied by the vicar, the Reverend Sir Reginald Champion. Over 2,000 tiny lengths of matchsticks were used to form the stained glass leaded windows. On the far end of the village is a row of shops where every detail of the shopkeeper's wares are faithfully reproduced within the windows, but mostly out of sight of viewers walking around the table. Although each of the buildings actually exists in England, this of course is not a model of the complete village of Chilham. It includes the most impressive and most important buildings of Tudor England. The coach house, the inn, the manor house and the watermill for grinding flour are all faithfully recreated. Gazing down on the table, it's difficult to believe that a man as crippled as John Pallotta could have created all this fine detail. Yet here is the proof. A remarkable memorial to a remarkable man.
If you'd like to believe the science fiction writers, in the future we could have whole cities underground. This probably doesn't appeal to many of us, but to find out a little bit about what it's like, we're going to take a trip 1 kilometre underground to the Tumut 2 power station. We've had dozens of requests asking to see the Snowy Mountain scheme. We have two here, one from John Portelli of Westfoots Crane, Victoria, who says, "Could you be able to show us the Snowy Mountain scheme in the Great Dividing Range and how it operates at one of the biggest systems in the world?" Another one here from Michael Morris of Ferny Hills in Queensland. He just says, "Could you tell me something about the Snowy Mountain scheme, please?" Well, to start off with, we're going to have a look at the futuristic world of the Tumut 2 power station. In 1949, the Snowy Mountains Hydroelectricity Authority opened its first office in Sydney. It wasn't long before it outgrew this office, and new headquarters were built at Cooma. Ahead was a massive undertaking to harness the water that fell on the eastern slopes of the Great Dividing Range. It was to be diverted to the dry western plains by tunnels through the range, generating electricity as it went. Tumut 2 Power Station is the deepest underground station in the Snowy Mountains scheme. 1 kilometre from the entrance of the tunnel, we reach a parking bay. Yeah, okay, I'll check that out for you. Tumut 1 and Tumut 2, the two underground power stations, are not generally open for public inspection. Entering the underground stations, one is struck by the futuristic appearance. A lone technician can monitor the entire operation of the station from the control room. During his lonely 8-hour shift, he makes daily checks on equipment and does routine maintenance work. Tumut 2's generation capacity is 280,000 kilowatts. During the construction of the tunnels, the tunnellers broke world records. The first world record was here in the Tumut section, where they tunnelled 122 metres through solid rock in a week. There are 22 kilometres of tunnels between here and the source of the water in the heart of the Snowy scheme, Lake Yucumbene. Lake Yucumbene is a key reservoir in the whole Snowy Mountain scheme. Water is stored here for both the Murray and Murrumbidgee rivers. Two transmission tunnels driven westward under the Great Dividing Range feed these two inland rivers with increased supplies of water for irrigation purposes. Many great achievements were accomplished during the construction of the Snowy Mountain scheme. One was the building of Cabramatta, the highest town in Australia. The Snowy Mountain scheme has been described as one of the wonders of the modern world. We're going to follow one of the two systems, the Snowy Tumut development through to the Murrumbidgee irrigation area. From Lake Yucumbene, the water used to generate electricity at Tumut 1 and Tumut 2 power stations then is held in Talbingo Reservoir. Below Talbingo is Tumut 3 power station. The biggest one in the Snowy Mountain scheme. And with me is the station engineer, Warwick Davis. Now Warwick, How much power does the station put out?
The station output is capable of 1,500 megawatts. There's 6 units in that amount, and they're each worth 250 megawatts. And during the peak periods of the morning, around about 8 o'clock, and about 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the station generates to assist the system. Then at night time, when the peak load's gone off, they use the water that's stored in Tournament to pump back up into Talbingo Dam.
And the same pipes are used for the generation?
Same pipes are used. The first 3 units, 1 to 3, are purely generators. 4, 5 and 6 are used for pumping back at night time and weekends.
The pipes look pretty big. How big would they be?
They're about 18 feet in diameter, and they're capable of putting a double-decker bus inside.
Are they the biggest pipes in the scheme?
The biggest pipes and the biggest power station in the Snowy scheme.
The fact that half the generators in Tumut 3 are reversible during off-peak periods means that excess power from other generating sources can be used to pump almost half the water back up to Talbingo Dam for reusing the next day. Tumut 3 station is open to the public and is well worth a visit to see how one of Australia's modern power sources operates. Scheme. From here the water discharges into Blowering Reservoir, but that's by no means the end of the water's life. We will be back after this break to follow the water's progress from here. rains, it starts to rain. We pass the town of Wagga and stop at the first weir on the Murrumbidgee River. The Murrumbidgee Irrigation scheme was operating with water from Burrinjuck Dam before the Snowy scheme came into use. We're at Berrinbed Weir, 180 kilometres downstream from the Blowering Dam. Here the water is diverted from the Murrumbidgee River into this main irrigation canal, which goes another 60 kilometres to Leyland, where the irrigation scheme starts. Berrinbed Weir was constructed in 1910 to divert the required amount of water from the Murrumbidgee into the main canal via the improved natural watercourse of Bundidgery Creek. The flow of water down the main canal is controlled here by lift gates adjacent to the main weir. 5,000 million litres of water a day flow down this canal. A familiar sight in the Murrumbidgee irrigation area towns is the bridges that cross the man-made canals. Today, the Murrumbidgee irrigation area covers 182,000 hectares, made up of 2,500 farms. It takes 3,741 kilometres of channels and drains to convey water to all these farms. Water distribution to the farms is controlled by channel attendants, who check the amount of water used. These measuring devices are called Dethridge wheels, after their inventor, J.S. Dethridge, who was the chief engineer of Victoria's Water Supply Commission. The water flows all the way from the Snowy Mountains to this rice paddy by gravity. Rice is the major crop produced on large farms throughout the irrigation area. Les Cubank was one of the original rice growers in the Griffith area.
This is a regulator, and we have one of these regulators in each of the bays in our rice field, and the regulator is used to make sure that we have even water depth over the entire area of each bay. The water comes in from the supply wheel, from the canal, and it passes right down through the paddock, and we get an even depth, which is very important to successful rice growing, is to have even water depth.
As well as rice, many other crops are grown in the irrigation area. The Latona cannery at Leeton processes a large range of locally grown fruit and vegetables. An average of 30,000 tonnes of fruit per year is canned here at Latona. The Murrumbidgee irrigation area is the largest wine-producing region in New South Wales, with an annual output of around 50,000 tonnes of grapes. Grape growing is an important economic industry to the area, being worth $9 million annually. This is second only to the rice crop, which is $13 million. Migrant families have played a big part in winemaking in the irrigation area. De Bortley's winery at Griffith is a good example of the winemaker's art. Dean de Bortley manages the family partnership, started by his father in 1928. From a very small beginning, the de Bortley winery has grown to one of the biggest in the area, making 65 different wines, spirits and liqueurs. Brian Edwards, the head winemaker at de Bortley's, keeps a watchful eye on the wines under his care.
This is a 6-year-old cream sherry. At the moment I'm just been taking it out of the barrel, looking at what we call condition. This is the colour of the wine, whether the wine is turbid or clean. This wine does need filtering. It's had a little bit of oxidation due to its excessive age in wood, but once it's been filtered I think it'll come up quite well. The colour is very important. This gives an indication of the age of the wine. This one you can see is quite dark because of its long time in wood.
All facets of wine producing are carried out on the property at De Bortley's, from growing the grapes to bottling and packaging their own wines. No winery would be complete without a tasting room and sales area. The oldest established vineyard in the Griffith area is McWilliams Wines, who are celebrating their 100th anniversary of winemaking in Australia. We have followed the Snowy Mountains water from power generating to wine producing, and quite a few places in between. An old-timer in Griffith once told the Water Resources Commission that he objected to paying for his water because by the time it had been through all the tunnels and generators, it was worn out. How wrong he was.
Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland Brothers. Whatever it is that you want to see, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. No matter whatever that happens to be, ask the Leyland Brothers.